Hello, everybody. Welcome to another review. Today we'll be looking at the fourth episode of Marvel's What If? What if Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands? This is such a neat concept for an episode in a lot of different ways, but what I find very interesting is that the premise is this is the first explicitly really negative result of one of these Nexus events. Now, in the first three, we've had a couple negatives okay, Steve Rogers is presumably dead by the time, 2012 rolls around in the first episode, but Peggy Carter is alive and well as Captain Carter. In the second one, it looks like Ego is probably going to try to, consume the universe, but we don't know that for sure, and Thanos, among others, is now kind of a good guy. Mostly, sort of, kind of. The last episode was definitely negative, and we wound up with 5 of our original Avengers dead, but it's not an impossible to overcome situation. What we have here is a really, really benign starting point turning out to, result in the worst conceivable end result. As they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I guess Stephen Strange would probably crash on that road too. So before we even get into the episode, I'm very intrigued by this one because it's probably the least clear Nexus event that we've seen so far. So I'm using the terminology from Loki because I think they're trying to build on that generally. But what we have is a world where Stephen Strange is much more of a just regular. He's way less egocentric, at least to start. And he's a lot less self-serving. He seems to just be kind of a nice guy. And, this we see reflected in the fact that Christine Palmer, Dr. Palmer, is willing to be around him and is actually going to one of his lecture acceptance speech things that she absolutely loathed in the actual movie Doctor Strange. So we can see that there's, this is, by all accounts, a Stephen Strange that is a better person than he is in the actual, sacred timeline of the MCU. But what's interesting is, despite being a better person, it kind of gives him a new sort of fatal flaw that winds up resulting in him just, going to places that we've never seen before. And they even kind of lead into that in the beginning of the episode. The Watcher basically says that, we've looked at a couple different things, but what if things go wrong basically right away? What about a universe that's doomed right from the get-go? So the general premise of this is, because Christine Palmer is, okay with Stephen Strange and is fine with him and is going with him to this event, when he gets into the car crash that normally would have destroyed his hands, instead his hands are fine, but Christine is killed. And Doctor Strange has to kind of work to try to get past the guilt and the sorrow, I guess, of the whole situation. He's kind of in a constant state of mourning over the loss. What's interesting is the differences of the timeline, kind of go away a little bit for a while. He still winds up, seeking out the mystic arts because he goes all over the world to try to find something. I don't think he's originally looking for time travel. I think he's just looking for answers, some kind of spiritual answer or some kind of, kickstart to make him feel like his life has meaning again. And he winds up in the mystic arts, their whole thing. And he winds up meeting the Ancient One and becoming the Sorcerer Supreme and mastering the Time Stone and the Eye of Agamotto, and he takes down Dormammu. The Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Like I said with the last episode, it sounds a little lifeless compared to how it actually does in the real movie. Kind of a shame they didn't just use the audio there, especially since it was literally a time loop, so you could get away with, copy pasting there. But so after all is said and done, you wind up with a Doctor Strange 2 years later who is regretting still that Dr. Palmer is dead. And he decides, against the subtle suggestion of Wong not to, he decides to go back in time himself. He sends himself back his own timeline to try and stop it. And what we get is a kind of extended sequence of him willingly putting himself in a time loop as he repeatedly tries to save her life. I know they weren't going for comedy, but boy, do some pieces feel a little bit... It's not like comedy, haha. It's not like black comedy. It's almost like... I wouldn't even say like a comedy of errors kind of situation. It's the sort of like a tragicomedy. I don't know how else to put it. The comedy, quote unquote, of the situation is how much he's putting himself through for no gain. He's never any closer to figuring out. The first time he goes through, he replays the events pretty similarly to how they actually went, except he's more willing to be like, yeah, I'm just going to go up there like a game show contestant and just woo and all that, and she's loving it, he's loving it. There's this weird thing where he starts to change lanes again, which is the thing that got him the accident, and then he goes back, and like there's not enough time that passes to make it seem like he actually got past the truck, so it kind of looks like he just went like just behind the truck. I don't know what that was all about. But then the car of fate, the comedic element to me, and again, not like haha funny, but like this sort of twisted comedy thing to it is the car of fate as I came to know it, which was no matter what he does on this road, this one car always knocks him off the road. The car of fate takes different forms, you see. Sometimes the car of fate is a car that fatefully crashes him. Sometimes when he takes a different route, the car of fate is actually a truck that smashes into the car. Sometimes the car of fate is her having a random heart attack on a dance floor, or a mugging at a pizza shop, or her apartment burning down. No matter what he does, Christine always dies. And it really gets the one part that like really lands the most, I think, out of all of those, because it's kind of like, oh, you've seen enough like time loop style stories where you get a little bit numb to like the shock of, oh no, what happened again? But one time I forget if he has her do it or if she just does it herself, but she winds up driving instead of him. And I'm curious if the intent of that element of the loop was basically him trying to sacrifice himself to save her. If the idea is like, okay, this car crash always happens if we go down this mountain road. So what if I'm in the passenger seat and she's in the driver's seat? She should survive. She does not. Still dies. He winds up, surviving. The first couple times, especially the first time, as he's realizing what's going on, he's like, no, Christine, no. And like the windshield behind him, the back windshield is broken, and it looked a little bit like a heart, just the littlest, tiniest bit, and it's all shattered and broken, which kind of makes sense for all of this. Eventually, the Ancient One shows up and says that this is an absolute point in time. This is an unchangeable fact, which is fascinating to me because it didn't even happen at all in the main sacred timeline, which means that absolute points in time are different between timelines, which probably is fine in a logical sense, but man, it's just an interesting thing to think about. This thing that is this immutable fact in one timeline is literally not even there at all in another, and that's just like a neat thing to me. So her death is required in this timeline. What you wind up getting is this really like this very dark road for Stephen Strange. He continues to be obsessed with this stuff. So the Ancient One basically tells him like, hey, you can't change in absolute point in time. And he kind of challenges that idea and is like, no, that can't be true. Somebody must have tried. Somebody must have succeeded. And the Ancient One actually manages to attack him. And we find out later she actually splits him in half. One half of him just goes back to his old life. By old life, I mean the first time loop, and just doesn't go back in time. The Ancient One is pressed about this later, and she's like, oh yeah, this I had to do this. It was the only way to find some way to stop you. And Doctor Strange, the one that got split off to his normal life, was like, that seems pretty dangerous. And she's like, absolutely, yeah, there's a terrible idea. Which turns out to be the truth. It was a terrible idea because the main, I guess, the other Strange, the one that doesn't go back to his old life, winds up very far back in time to a lost library, to what eventually becomes known as the Lost Library of Cagliostro. I've heard some people refer to this version of Doctor Strange as Cagliostro, as if the idea being that he, by spending as much time as he does there, becomes he. In the same way, if you've seen Heroes, the TV show, there's this ancient character named Takezo Kensei. I think I got the name right, and it's referred to a lot as this legend in the first season, and in the second season, Hiro Nakamura, a time traveler, winds up being sent to feudal Japan, where he meets the person going by Takezo Kensei, Adam Monroe, I think, and for a while, it's basically Adam Monroe, who is a person who cannot die. He's got a healing factor. Living through his life as this bizarre, super heroic samurai, Takezo Kensei. But then at the last second, at this really important moment, he winds up betraying Hiro, and then Hiro winds up taking on the mantle of Takezo Kensei and performs acts that in the end wind up being the ones that inspired Hiro the most to begin with. I think the specific story that Hiro Nakamura is told by his father as a child is literally a thing that Hiro Nakamura eventually goes and does. So that is what may have happened here, that this Doctor Strange eventually kind of becomes, whether he used the name or not, Cagliostro. And honestly, it doesn't really matter in the end anyway, both in the meta sense and definitely in the literal sense in the universe of this. So we get kind of the It's Strange joke in a new form for this, which I think is kind of cool. He winds up meeting a guy named Obang, who is kind of the caretaker of this library, and asks him, who are, you dressed very strange for a sorcerer. And he says, it's Armani, which then Obang is like, oh, okay, so your name is Armani kind of thing. And he goes, oh, it's strange. He's like, it's not as strange as you might think. And like, haha, we got that again. That was one of my favorite jokes from the original Doctor Strange, just because it's this, I know some people get really pissed off by here's things happening, and then a joke that just stops everything, and then things go again, but I kind of like those. I'm a big fan of, it's kind of this fun little swerve in the middle of, a scene. It really depends on how you deliver it. The delivery really makes all the difference in the world. But Stephen winds up kind of getting around some traps in there, which I think is kind of fun. He totally casually is like, oh, teleport myself up there, do a dispel on these runes, yada yada, go in there. And he winds up spending centuries studying and sending himself basically back in time, I think, or locking his personal timeline. It's unclear exactly how it works, but Obang dies of old age while Stephen is doing this stuff, and Stephen doesn't appear to have aged at all. But the idea is he learns that he can absorb the strength, I don't know if it's necessarily the powers, but at least the strength of other beings that he summons. So he starts summoning. He tries to summon what looks like the Obelisk from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 and What If Episode 1, the What If Peggy Carter became Captain America or whatever that was called. I'm not sure anymore if it's the Obelisk, because the Obelisk, from what we could tell, I think the Obelisk was just a creature from space, though it might have been I think it might have been an interdimensional monster. So if that's the case, that would still work here. So it's interesting to see it come back again. I'm sure they had the assets lying around and they were like, well, I mean, we may as well. It's right there. But so he totally gets his ass kicked by that, and he has to start smaller. So he starts, he summons this possessed lawn gnome, I think, which was adorable. But you get this really interesting sequence. For one, you have him getting bigger and bigger monsters over time, and it's this really feverish scene, this very fever dream, like dark nightmare thing going on as he starts absorbing more and more summoned like demon things. And I think this is the point where I have to talk about the artistry of this episode is perfect. 100% perfect. Every element of it is dead on, 100%. I can't even imagine a better way to have done basically the entirety of this episode, visually speaking. While he's summoning these creatures, you get this really amazing variety of weird summoned things. A lot of them will as he's about to absorb them or is absorbing them, will like do these like cool silhouettes and cool shapes with him. So there's this big demon buck that he summons, and as it gets closer to him, the antlers just grow out of his head to look like enormous horns. He eventually is able to absorb the obelisk, and that makes him have like all these like tentacles sticking out of him and slowly shrinking into him. There's this big demon bird with blue glowing eyes, and he has the same kind of like underlit blue glowing thing going on. And when he's absorbing them, it's like light and energy pouring out of his eyes and his mouth as he absorbs them in. And I swear I've seen that specific imagery used before in something, and I cannot place it. What I can place, though, is that later on, when this version of Doctor Strange, and I think from this point forward, it should be no surprise that this Doctor Strange, becomes this evil force. I, in my notes, started referring to them as Stephen and Strange. Just felt right. So Strange eventually there was eventually a battle between Stephen and Strange. They are two timelines in the same timeline, like in the same universe, which shouldn't happen, and it was a very desperate move by the Ancient One. During their battle, Strange starts throwing these energy blasts, and they're rendered as this orange-yellow, flamish intensity light, but with these black dots all around it. And while that was going on, the first thing I thought was like, this feels like and looks like so much like the power cosmic. So I'm not an expert on the comics, but the power cosmic is one of those things that's like this absolutely immense force, I guess, energy in the universe, and it's on a scale that is difficult to conceptualize. Like, I believe the classic, character that has the power cosmic is Galactus, is one who has the power cosmic. And when they actually render it as a visual thing, there are two ways they tend to visualize it. One, when it's contained within a character, the character will have part of their color replaced with a kind of blue and black sort of celestial kind of texture. It's sort of like looking out into deep space and seeing some kind of nebula or galaxy out in the distance. That's kind of the texture that's on them as a color, with, speckled with stars. When they're using it, though, it has this very distinct look of this yellow-orange ball of energy with the black dots. And it jumped out immediately that, like, oh shit, at some point Doctor Strange obtained the power cosmic doing all of this stuff. And I wasn't entirely convinced that was necessarily the in-universe case, because like it could have just been an artistic reference or something, but there comes a point as shit is really going off that the Watcher actually muses to himself like, I could stop him. I could tell him right now what's going to happen as a result of his actions. And he's like, oh, but I can't interfere. I must not interfere. And Strange actually looks up directly in the vicinity of where the Watcher is in the background. It's like, what was that? Who was that? Hell, I can hear you. So like, all of a sudden, Strange can hear the Watcher, which should give you a real good indication of just how ridiculously powerful Strange has become at this point. And he keeps morphing every time he gets new power, and his body seems to struggle to keep itself together. And then when Stephen and Strange eventually come face to face, Stephen looks very much like Doctor Strange does normally. Strange has a pointed beard. His skin is very kind of pasty and chalky. He looks very gaunt. He looks thinner. His face looks thinner. His eyebrows even look angrier. He even has a different, like, spikier cape. Because he stole it from a bug, because he never got the cape of levitation, or the cloak of levitation. Well, actually, he did, but he didn't have it when he wound up going back in time to the library in the first place. So he just has this very vampiric sort of look to him, and the visual difference between them is really cool. You have this really awesome fight between them, and you basically have Stephen, who's using what we've seen already, more or less, of Doctor Strange's powers. You've got the ribbon move, which I think is supposed to be some spell granted by Siderax, who is a god or godlike being that bestows his power or its power onto the Juggernaut. In the comics, usually, I think that's how that works, and it's part of what makes Juggernaut so, like, unstoppably powerful. So there's that. But you get a whole bunch of things that Doctor Strange normally does in Stephen during this fight. Strange uses the power cosmic, and he's using all of these really bizarre moves. He keeps trying to absorb Stephen, because the idea being, if he can absorb Stephen back in, he may finally have enough power to bring Dr. Palmer back to life. Because that's the thing, is he can't reverse time to make it so that she didn't die. So he's trying to reverse death at this point. Like, he's trying an entirely different tactic. And they fight. The capes even fight at one point. The cloak of levitation and that bug cape, whatever it was, literally are sailing through the sky and fighting, and it looks so dynamic, and it looks really, like, awesome. And the the cloak of levitation tries to get in the way of, like, a blast and deflects it, and then tries to wrap up Strange's, bind his wrists, and then he just goes and just, like, sears right through it, and the cloak of levitation is dead and gone entirely. I was so sad to see the cloak die. And then eventually he just wins. Strange just beats Stephen and absorbs him and becomes the ultimate Sorcerer Supreme, basically. And what's wild is, before this battle even starts, Stephen walks out into the streets of New York and sees that everything's very quiet and that everyone's kind of dissolving into this sort of acidy gas gunk. It looks like gravity is reversed and everyone's kind of dissolving into ink. And that's a very meaningful kind of look, because as this continues over the course of their fight, now, Strange has won. He looks out on New York City and everything, the buildings, everything is dissolving into this inky, muddy stuff. He is able to revive. He's finally able to bring Christine Palmer back to life, but he can't totally contain his monstrous form, so she is horrified. He looks like basically any really, like, biblical depiction of the devil, like that level of fucked up. And it doesn't even matter, because eventually she dissolves too, because at this point the universe is ending. And the way that they frame this, they have this one perfect frame, and I'm debating whether I can use it for the thumbnail, because I usually try to stay as far as I can away from spoilers, but it's so perfect. It's such a perfect, it's the number one shot they've done in this entire show so far, where it's Stephen, and at one point he's kind of blasting to try to stop the universe from ending, but what you get is the frame of the shot, and on all edges, all the way around, that goopy dissolving thing is kind of like, they look like fingers or flagella or something just seeping into the world and closing in. And what it looks like is ink blobs dissolving and pulling into a comic book panel to depict the universe coming to an end. And it's such a perfect comic book representation of what's going on. And it was so, so good. I can't stop gushing about it. It was such a good shot. I loved it. And ultimately, she's about to die, and he, apropos of nothing, looks up directly at the Watcher and says, you could fix this. Why won't you fix this? And Watcher's like, I probably could reverse all this, make it stop, bring her back, stop this universe from ending. But you probably, I could tell you how to do it, but you wouldn't even listen, would you? Kind of thing. Like, it's just sort of like the Watcher is, not supposed to interfere. And at this point, Stephen is Strange is strong enough that he can see the Watcher entirely. He can see beyond the bounds of his universe and his timeline. And the Watcher's like, yo, you deserve this. You did this to yourself. And everyone is dead because of you. And the end result is the Watcher just is like, well, I'm out of here. And the world turns into this crystal. Should be noted, too, when Strange beats Stephen, he as he brings Christine back, the time stone in the Eye of Agamotto, it seems like it turns into a black hole. Like it succumbs to its own gravity and becomes this incredibly red sphere. And it's like, whoa, Stephen Strange is now powerful enough to, like, reconstitute an Infinity Stone. Like, that's where we're at this point. I have no idea what happened to it, but it's like, that shouldn't happen. That's definitely bad. And in the end, the universe just ends. It doesn't, or rather, everything in the universe except Stephen Strange ends. We leave the episode with him in a crystallized universe. Literally, it'd be smaller than the room that I'm in right now. And that's the state of the universe. I really hope season 2 is a bunch of sequels, because I would love to see what could possibly happen after that. But at the same time, if it's not going to get a sequel, this is a great place to end it. Really, really good place to end it. I thought that this episode was super good. There was a great quote in there. There's a fine line between devotion and delusion, which I thought was really meaningful there. I thought that this episode was really, really good. I'm trying to think if I even have any, like, negative things to say about this episode. Like, the Nexus event isn't all that clear, but I don't know that it needs to be. Yeah, the artistry of this episode was great. Easily the most negative and most dark thing we've seen in this show so far. I'm hesitating because when I was planning this review, I was planning to give this episode a 9. And I have not given a 9 to almost anything so far. I gave it to, on a very special episode of WandaVision, and I gave it to The Whole World Is Watching in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And those were easily the best episodes of those two shows, in my opinion. On a very special episode, I think, is the one that ends with Pietro or fake Pietro showing up. And The Whole World Is Watching is the episode that I believe ends with John... oh my God, I forgot his actual name. John Walker beheading a guy in front of everybody with the shield. Both episodes really, really big. I'm kind of debating right now whether or not to actually give this a 10. It might be the closest we've come so far. It's easily so the reason that I'm not jumping directly into a 10 on this is because What If has been pretty good so far. But it's harder to get invested week to week when I know that the story that I watch this week is over and done before the next week starts. So the next week isn't going to have anything to do with this. The Obelisk was a nice thing to see again in this episode after it showed up in the first, for example. But I'm on the fence about the ranking to give because I can't tell if I think this is a 10 in a neutral sense, where I think this is better than On a Very Special Episode, and I think it's better than The Whole World Is Watching. Or if I think it's a 10 because it stands so far above the 3 episodes that we've gotten so far. Because so far this is... So I can say, without any real hesitation, of the 4 so far, this is the best episode of the show. Easily. I don't think the other 3 get anywhere close to it. It seems like most people have similar thoughts on episodes 1 and 3 about how I did, as far as like, yeah, they're pretty good. They're pretty solid. Those are pretty good. It sounds like most people like the T'Challa Star-Lord episode more than I did, which is fine, obviously. But for this one, I don't know. I really don't know. I guess where I'm stuck now is like, okay, what would an episode have to do to be better than this one? So I guess where I'm at is this. Other episodes have felt like an origin story of a larger narrative. This one feels like a complete thought. So, man, I don't know. I really don't know. Like, part of me wants to say, so long as this stays a 1-part episode, I'd give it a 10, but if it became a 2-parter, I'd give it a 9. But that doesn't even necessarily make sense, right? Like, the other shows are all parts of a larger narrative, and, it's really tough. I don't know. I can say, like, so this is part of a catch-up period, and I can say that I have seen 2 more episodes since then. Neither of them I like as much as this one. This is still my favorite out of the first 6. You know what? I'm going to do it. I'm literally struggling to think of anything that I did not like about this episode. Yeah, no, it was really good. I guess the Ancient One looked a tiny bit strange for her 3D model, and the Car of Fate was definitely not meant to be in any way comedic, and it kind of felt just the tiniest bit like black comedy comedic that it kept showing up. But like, those aren't mistakes. Those aren't problems. Or I guess the second one isn't a mistake or a problem. That's just like a tone thing. But like the first one, I guess, is like the mildest 3D mistake. I think I'm going to, I'm going to commit to it. What if Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands? Is going to get a perfect 10 for me. The first perfect 10 that I've given in this series. Yeah. It's that good. And I said it, and I can't take it back now until I eventually put out some kind of revision video where I go back and go, actually, here's my list of 9 episodes that I've decided to give new ranks to. No, I'm going to give this one a 10. This was really good. Benedict Cumberbatch was awesome in both roles. He got to flex his muscles in the voice acting realm, which he's done a bit of anyway. He was Smaug in the Hobbit movies, and I think he actually wasn't he also like the voice of the Necromancer, aka eventual Sauron as well. I don't know, but the point is, this was really, really good, really good. Easily the best episode of this show so far. And it's at least on par with those other 2 9s that I mentioned. And yeah, I got a 10. I would love to hear what you guys think of this episode, because this one is my favorite. I think it was really perfectly done. And I think what puts it over the line is the mastery of the medium that they worked with while keeping it referential back to the comic book medium. Like, they did just a perfect job of blending those 2 visual styles together. I couldn't have asked for anything more. I think it was really good. So yeah, I would love to hear what you thought of this episode of What If. I would love to hear what you thought of this R-rated review. And yeah, we'll be back. I'll have another review tomorrow, and then we'll be back on Monday to continue the series and finish catching up. So thank you guys very much for watching. And here's hoping that the rest of this series winds up being as good as this episode was. I'll catch you later. Bye.